All right, we are here for the testimony series. Honored to have tonight Mike and Kim Bailey with us here to share their story with us. I've actually had the privilege of knowing Mike for most of my life. We met in high school. Mike and I both happened to go to the same small town of Clearwater, Kansas, graduated from there. And later in life, almost 20 years, God brought our paths back together. And I'm excited for them to be here today sharing our story with us. So, Mike, Kim, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start off with just tell us a little bit about who you guys are, where you came from, and where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Missouri, in Moberly, Missouri, and my family moved to Kansas when I was 5 years old, to Dexter, Kansas, of all places, about 350 people. I had 12 people in my graduating class, so a very tiny town. I was involved in athletics and, involved in everything, especially in a school that size. It's easy to do. But when I went to college, I found myself a little fish in a big pond. So I started doing things to fit in with people, such as partying and drinking, and really grew away from the Lord. I grew up in a church. My dad was the song leader of our worship leader of our church, and he, I was baptized at 11 years old. I took my faith seriously all through high school, but once I hit college, I did find myself falling away from God. I always knew what was right. I always knew what I should be doing, but I just kind of felt like I had my shot with God, and that God was done with me.
Wow. Okay. Mike, what about you?
Well, you kind of said it all there for me. We grew up in Clearwater, but I have to say that I did get baptized when I was 18. We were going to church, but I never saw any real change in my life after when that happened. More or less, I'd say from 18 years old up until I was 39, I thought I was saved, that I was living however I wanted to. I was doing drugs, drinking, partying, fighting, doing all the wrong things, and still thought, if there is a God, well, how could I not get into heaven? I'm a good guy. But as I've learned since then that there is a God, and just thinking that you're right with him isn't good enough.
Amen.
Then I went through a divorce too, but found the love of my life finally. And
tell us a little bit about that. How did you guys meet?
We actually met online.
Match.com.
Had our
awesome.
first date at Old Chicago. Mm-hmm. Went out for ice cream and then took her back to meet my dad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of moved real quick.
I was right for it.
Yeah, I was actually in the middle of a divorce. I had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and I wasn't about to wait. I knew what I wanted in life, and we had an awesome first date, and so I can tell you our second night. The day after our second day, the day after our first date, we had he came over to my house, and we were eating tacos at the dinner table, and I had a sign in my dining room that said faith on it. And he says, what's that? Are you a believer? And I said, well, yeah, I believe. I don't go to church, but I do believe there's a God, and I just haven't found a church I really fit in with or felt like going to. And I said, how about you? And he says, I don't know if I believe in all that stuff.
Wow.
So second date, he pretty much told me that he didn't believe that there was a God, and I was still okay with it. So, which is odd, but
it's amazing though sometimes how we do before we know God. We're just okay with stuff like that and go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell us, how and when did God begin to work himself into your guys' life, into your marriage, into your story?
Well, we moved in together pretty quickly, but decided we were going to get married. And we're having Peyton's birthday party one day, and a friend of mine was with us. And hey, you know, Joplin has a church here in town. Maybe you ought to get in touch with him. And if I remember right, the last time I had spoken to you was 20 years ago, and I'd kicked you out of my house. So I didn't know how that was going to go over, but I did message you on Facebook, and you got right back to me, and we met for breakfast and sat down and talked about getting married. And you told me about your church, but you didn't invite me. It was weird. Most people would think that to get married, you have to go through marriage counseling and belong to the church or whatever, but you just said yes, you would do it. So I went home and told Kim, we got to go to this church, check it out. That same day, while I was having breakfast with Joplin, Kim was at the doctor for an ear infection.
I think that I had strep throat or something, yeah.
Found out she was pregnant.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that same day, or that next Wednesday, we went to church and then told him that, we were pregnant too, on top of finding out that. But it was only a couple weeks later we found out we
miscarried that pregnancy.
Now it hurts, but then it didn't. At that time, I wasn't saved, and I was just like, why are you taking this so hard? It was just a glob of cells.
Yeah, he said that to me. Didn't go over too well, but yeah.
Cold-hearted.
But God,
Yeah.
he was working.
Yeah.
So you guys made contact with me, and you start coming to church almost maybe even out of just a sense of, I don't know the right word for it, appreciation, checking it out. It's not that you had to go. Maybe your interest was piqued.
Mm-hmm.
And God started to use that connection to bring you guys to this place of like radical life change. Tell us about that.
Well, we were going to church, and we were learning a lot. Definitely I was learning to put, I'm not in control. There's nothing that I can do to change the outcome of anything. I really wanted to give Mike a child. So I was really obsessing about getting pregnant, and on top of that, planning a wedding. I got to get this planned. And, once we miscarried, it's kind of like I just kind of let it go and let everything fall into place. We found ourselves at church on a Wednesday night, pulled into the parking lot. It's packed, I'm like, what in the world is going on? Well, it was camp meeting, and we had no idea about that. So I don't know how we had missed that memo, but we did. But we went in and sat down, and there was a family singing, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the family. But Mike he was not having any of it. His attitude was so horrible that night, and I couldn't figure out why, but I know now that it was definitely Satan wanting us to leave, because I was just about to pull him by his ear out of that church, because he's like rolling his eyes and huffing and puffing through the singing. He's like, they just keep singing the same words over and over again. I'm like, come on, Mike, like, stop. Well, then Danny Ledbetter got up to preach, and he was preaching about taking your worship home, and how, you can't just have it at the church. You need to take it back and apply it to your family. And but for some reason, in the middle of the sermon, he stops and he points his finger directly at Mike and I and said, "It is a sin to live together before you're married." And then he continues on with the sermon.
Like, what is this guy?
Yeah, we just kind of looked at each other like, did he seriously just point and look at us? Like, we had never seen this man before. We had no idea who he was, never talked to him. And so just kind of like, what was that, And you can go back and listen. We've gone back to listen to that on the recordings and everything. And you can hear when he says it.
Stops in out of nowhere.
Yeah. So, the altar call came, and I really felt led to go forward, and I had a million things going through my mind. If I go forward, what am I going to do? We're living together. How's this going to work? I'm like, if I go forward, my life's going to change. I could lose friends over this. just worrying and worrying about what's going to happen. But it was just so strong. I couldn't ignore it. So I went forward. And as soon as I got up, I noticed that Mike was walking behind me, and that was a huge relief. So we went forward, and Branson led us in the prayer, and we went home that night. I gave myself to the Lord last night, and as far as I knew, I thought Mike did too. And we went home that night and talked, and I'm like, what are we going to do? We can't continue. We need to make this right. We need to get married, either move up our wedding date. So we invited you all over for dinner, and you kind of talked us through it. And yeah, you guys should probably move up the wedding date. And so we did. We only had one day available that we both had off. It was towards the end of the year, and I didn't have any vacation left. And Mike
Just
worked the
started a new
weekends,
job.
so it was kind of like, okay, Black Friday it is. So we got married on November 27th, just very close family and friends. It was a mess of a day. I had a middle ear infection, and it was icy, and it was crazy, but we went through with it. We really felt like that's what God was wanting us to do. So we ended up getting married, and just 3 weeks after that, we found out we were pregnant again.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, meanwhile, I'm seeing her lead our family. At night, she's tucking the girls in. She's saying prayers with them. I'm laying in bed waiting for her so we can watch our shows on TV. But nothing was taking effect in me. My life wasn't changing, but I was seeing the changes in her. And you had given a sermon not too long about fasting. We were just going to talk about fasting, and not really sure all that went into the sermon, but I went home and started researching fasting. And God's in our house. I see him in our church. He's not in my life, and I don't know why. So I decided to do a 40-day fast where I got rid of sugar, which, if anybody knows me, knows that's like most of my meals. But on top of getting rid of sugar, you can't just get rid of that and pray to God. I mean, I got rid of television and cell phone, and when I was working, I could do it by myself, but I'd put headphones on, and I went back through every sermon you preached for the last 5 years, and every single one of them was just every day, 10, 12 sermons a day.
Wow.
And just focusing, praying. I kept a journal on it. And it was it was kind of crazy, but there was a weekend stretch where I just I was working, and I had come to a point in a sermon that I could feel God speaking to me that this is the line where if you're coming to me, there's some things in your life that you're going to have to get rid of. You're going to have to quit smoking weed. You're going to have to quit drinking. You're going to have to get that porn addiction out of your life. And I took my headphones off and said, no, I like these things. These things keep me from going crazy. Went to lunch with some guys from work, and we went to Wendy's. And there was as we were sitting down eating, the lady that works the register was kneeled down at the register, and a guy walked up behind her, another coworker of hers, and started doing some sexual innuendos behind her. And it made me mad. And I told the guys there that if that was my daughter, I already would have hurt that kid. And they all questioned me, you're supposed to be a Christian, I was really frustrated with that I am supposed to be a Christian, but I was going through the motions of being a Christian.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that Sunday night, Branson gave a sermon on the fear of God that before he had started preaching, he actually stopped and backed away from the stand and started asking people in the church, why do you love God? And, people raised their hand and were saying things, I love God because he first loved me. And I called him out. I actually spoke up and was like, you guys are just quoting the Bible. You guys you're not, do you really love God? Because I am scared to death of him. I'm scared. And Branson stopped and said, Mike, it's funny that you say that because my sermon's titled The Fear of God. And he went in.
Wow.
And he scared me some more. I bawled through that sermon, but I still didn't cave in and accept him into my life. And the next morning, I had decided I was going to watch TV. I was going to fold laundry. I was going to stay busy and stay away from my fast. After I had done some laundry and stuff, I sat down to watch TV, and I went to pick up the remote, and guess where it was? Right on top of my Bible. And coincidence? No. All right. So I decided to read. And I started reading in Luke chapter 8 about casting seeds into fertile soil, and then moved on to Legion. And throughout Legion, there was a point where I was actually fading into sleep. You know, you nod off when you read. You guys don't have to know what I'm talking about, but this is where I heard a voice say, Michael. And it was a woman's voice. It was weird, but I got up and I'm looking all over my house. I opened my front door. Is there anybody outside? I'm walking down the hall. I went downstairs. I'm moving doorways open and stuff like that, trying to find who said that. I went back and just finished reading, you know, and the moment that took place there is hard to understand, but I just knew that God was seeing me, and it felt awesome. And I just sat there and cried, thank you for seeing me. And I couldn't think of anything else to do but go tell my dad.
Wow.
Jumped in my car from there and went straight over to Dad's house. Dad, it happened. You know, Dad, I'm saved, and I know that if this hadn't happened today, that I was going to go to hell. And it was an amazing experience. I had that moment, January 4th, 2016.
Praise
Wow.
the Lord.
How awesome. So that was a little over 4 years ago now. And tell us a little bit about your journey since then.
I feel like
So
I've been doing all the talking.
What has changed? What was different? So, you know, you got saved, and Mike has said he was able to totally see a change in your life, and Mike had to see it for himself, you know, had to come to his own personal encounter with God. And that happened, and now both you guys are really on the same page, the same heart as far as what you want the home to look like, what you want marriage to look like, what you want life to look like. And so how would you describe what the months and years that followed began to look like?
Well, there was still, you know, like I said, I felt that God was done with me because of all the sin that I had had in my life. And what I found is that God doesn't need you to be perfect to come to him, that he will come to you, you accept him, and then he'll help you get things right. And that's what he's done in our family. Financially, we were a mess. You know, like I said, I had just come out of a divorce, had credit card debt. He had some of his own. We were just a mess, and
Just vehicles and credit cards.
Yeah.
We were $90,000 in debt, and I was scared. That didn't have our house included.
Wow.
And
You know, it was stupid debt.
yeah. And in 4 years' time, you know, we have our car payments. So we're completely credit card
Good
out
for
of
you
credit
guys.
card debt, and you know, that's a lot. We did a financial piece through the well, and that just blessed us so much.
Yeah.
So I mean, just that alone, I mean, it's just everything. Spiritually, you know, just taking away my anxieties, showing me how to be a loving and good wife to Mike, and how to love him. It's just how to be parents. I know you guys have talked with us before on raising our children and how that needs to look. So, I mean, just everything.
We still butt heads on
We
that.
do,
But
occasionally. But I mean, it's just, but everything. He has changed everything in our lives. It's just been amazing. I can't imagine where we would be, if we would even still be together, if God hadn't come into our lives.
That's incredible. I know you guys have a really unique testimony about the birth of Brendan, and would you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, Brendan was born just a few days after my birthday, and about a month later, we noticed that he had a fever.
Yeah. So we took him to the. Sorry, I didn't mean. I thought you were. But we took him to the doctor. I called my doctor. Like, he has a really high temperature. He was 3 weeks old. What do? He's like, bring him in. So we took him down to our doctor and Mulvane, down to Dr. Comer, and he said, yeah, I'm gonna have you guys take him to Wesley. Like, don't stop at home, don't go anywhere. You just get him up to Wesley. Of course,
let me add something.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
But while we were in there, he was making the phone calls to Wesley to get us so we could just walk right in the door. But all of his nurses got together and they came in and they prayed over him.
Wow.
It was super cool to see.
That is awesome.
You don't see that very often anywhere, but I had to get that out there. That God was in it from the very beginning.
From the beginning.
Here you go. It was a trial, but.
And we're still very young in our faith at this point. We're 9 months in, 10 months in. So it was terrifying, So we get up to the hospital and they're hooking up IVs and his temperature was like 103 degrees. Started running tests. The poor thing was running. He had a spinal tap. He had x-rays. He had sonograms. Everything you can think of. Just his poor little body. He looked horrible. He was really pale. His heart rate was really high. Temperature was really high. And we just had, the doctor couldn't figure out what was going on. Every test kept coming back negative. They sent one off to California. That was supposed to take a couple days to get back. So we were waiting on that. But we were kind of in a limbo. And
the old Mike came out on the doctor the day before this happened, but I pretty much cornered the guy like this, all these tests, everything you're doing, I need to see results because what you're doing ain't working. And they had changed his formula and he had thrown up really bad, so Kim needed to take the kids. Meanwhile, we still got other kids to raise, know, but Kim took the kids to her mother-in-law so she could get showered and get cleaned up, and I was staying there. I listened to a sermon from Greg Wesley.
Wesley Campbell.
Wesley Campbell. I had just heard that he was at our church, so I wanted to find out who this guy was. So I pulled up some of his old sermons, and he had done one, bring it to the Lord. If you're sick, or maybe help me out with the verse here. If you're sick or afflicted, you need, bring it to the elders. And so, that was on a Saturday night, and I knew Sunday morning this
James
needed
chapter 5, yeah. I remember that request, Mike.
It was, yeah. I left the hospital that morning to go to church, and Kim called me before I'd even gotten just a couple miles away and said that they're going to life watch him to Kansas City. Man, and I was like, okay, I'll turn around. And she said, no, don't you turn around. We need this, So I went to my house first and sat in the driveway. We were going to go to Kansas City. He was going to pack up some clothes. So I packed up some clothes, and I got to church, and you were already heading up to the front, and I grabbed Deuce. Like, man, I know this is bad timing, but I need the guys, man. Get the guys together. And he grabbed Branson, and Branson grabbed Jason Garraway. And next thing you know, there's a whole group of guys praying over me in the back room, and I'm just bawling. They all got their hands on me, and I told them what was going on, and they prayed over me, and sat through the sermon. I don't know what it was. I don't. Mm-hmm. I just cried the whole time. But went back to the hospital just in time. They had him already loaded up, ready to go. Neither one of us could go with him because we were too big.
My mom rode with him on the plane, and I took the girls up in her car, and he drove his truck. And I think we drove 90 miles an hour the whole way there. We saw one cop, but we were in one lane traffic, and so we were going the speed limit then, praise God. So no speeding tickets, but we got there, and he was actually comfortable. He looked better than we had seen him that whole week. And so they were like, we're just going to let him rest today. No test. We're just going to let him let his body recover a little bit, get him settled. So go ahead.
And the next day they got IVs back in him again, and they couldn't do his arms anymore, so they put one in his head. And we just had no answers. We had no idea what was going on with him. But I think we were there maybe one full day, 2 days max. But that I got a call in the morning from you. You're like, Mike, I was wanting to know if I could come see him. Like, you sure, you could come anytime. And, all right, I'm downstairs. It's like, what? All right, they need you to come down here and let me in. So I went down, and you and Raz McCarthy were down there, and Raz had flown you up, which was super cool. He's always got a place in my heart just for that. This is at the same time that we were going through flooding here in Derby. Your house had flooded. Your oldest son had just broke his ankle. So, I mean, you had things to do too. You know, you didn't have to just stop everything you were doing and fly to Kansas City, but you did. And I appreciate that. I don't think I've ever told you thank you for that. We just talked. We just surrounded his bed and just talked, and then just you prayed over him before you left, but everything, you just calmed us down.
Yeah, absolutely.
You calmed us down, and maybe that's what it maybe affected him, but when you prayed over him, we all calmed down, and his heart rate went down to normal, his temperature went down to normal, and just
Next day, everything was fine.
Everything was okay. Just
Praise the Lord.
Praise God. And
Yes.
I remember getting the phone call from you after we left. We were eating lunch before flying back home. And I remember getting the phone call from you there. I mean, it had literally been an hour or no more than an hour and a half. And already his temperature had dropped. And he was looking normal and feeling better. And it was obviously way too soon to for the doctors or anybody for that matter to say, hey, you guys are good, go home.
right.
They kept him for another 24 hours.
They
You guys,
kept us for
2
the
more
rest of the
days.
week. We stayed several more days.
Yeah, we were still waiting on a test result that had been sent to California that we had found that didn't
But
get sent earlier or
no
something. I don't know. There was
IVs
some,
or anything.
yeah, but
We
he
just
was
had to stay in
IV
the
free the
room.
next day.
isn't that incredible?
Yeah,
How awesome
it was.
is that?
It was amazing. Yeah.
It's one of the God stories I love. I'll never get tired of hearing that story. Wow. Our God does still answer prayers.
Absolutely.
And he still does the miraculous.
Sometimes it's hard to remember that. I've
Yeah.
seen it with my own eyes more than once, and I still have to take a deep breath and say, God's got it.
Amen.
You know?
Amen.
And I can't help but sit here and think about just how personal he is too. From, you just saying, God, I don't feel you, and you did this fast, and God just kept pursuing. And he thought, no, that way's not going to work. Mike said no, so I'm going to try this way because I love you, and I'm a personal God. And then you look at this situation where you needed God to work in certain ways, and He met you in that personal way. And
And for a while, I thought that that's the only way anybody could be saved. And if you didn't do it the way I did, how could you be saved?
Right.
And it was arrogant, and people saw that, and it was really hard to convince people that God was real because of my arrogance in my testimony. And
sure,
I hate trying to give my testimony like that because it does feel arrogant now, but God is God. There's just...
Amen.
Yeah,
You know
it's-
what's been fascinating to me is we've been doing this testimony series. Last week we talked with Kelly Wilkes, and Kelly and her husband serve as deacons at our church. She was saved on her kitchen floor.
mm-hmm.
Watch at the 700 Club.
Right.
Kevin was saved sitting in his seat at the church. You were saved responding to an altar call, coming forward. You talked about that earlier, about coming, and for those of you that don't know, a lot of times at church, at the end of our messages, we will give an option. If you're here and you need to respond, you want to be saved, come, and we'll lead you to the Lord. We'll pray with you. And you responded, at a church service. Mm-hmm. And then, Mike, your story is one of really grappling with God, and God grappling with you, and wrestling back and forth, but seeking Him, and Him finding you, of all places, in your house. Mm-hmm. And that is the awesome thing about our God, that He is able to save anybody, anywhere, that's willing to turn to Him in sincere faith, no matter where that's at. So, guys, thanks for sharing your story with us. Do you have any final thoughts today?
Not a whole lot. Just thankful for what God's done in your life, and glad to have you guys a part of the well.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yes.
Thanks for being here. God bless you guys.